I invited Jim here, I do want to say this, I invited Jim here because this is information I wanted to learn. It's gotten to be a really big trend here lately, have you noticed, where everybody would bend their shears for the alignment, and now they're all wanting to hammer. It's like, which is the best? And so that's why I knew Jim had studied both, and I asked him to come speak for us, okay? Is that a good introduction?
That'll work.
All right.
Okay, so as far as sharpening is concerned, I've been sharpening since 1991. Got brought into the business by Lee Wolf, the person who started Wolf Industries, and really have been in the business in some form or another ever since. I was with Wolf for about 20 years, after I'd been sharpening for about 5. And then now it's kind of scattered what I'm doing right now. Since I've left Wolf, I went out and started sharpening. I actually got snapped up by a firm, and they asked me to get my license for doing financial advising. So I went and took my licenses for doing financial advising, Series 7 and Series 66, passed those tests, did that for a couple of years, and then I realized, you know, working with people's money makes you kind of want to, you know, stick bicycle spokes in your eyes. So it has its positives and its negatives. It was a great job. I enjoyed it, but while I was behind the desk, I had another company actually contact me, and they sell composite materials. So I'm working in the composites industry as well as sharpening right now. Still sharpening, still do mobile sharpening. I have a full mobile van set up in a Ford Transit, the larger Ford Transits, which is great, but I also do a lot of sharpening where I just walk in with the machine under my arm and just this bag just slung right over my shoulder. Just did that the other day in a large barber shop where there's probably, I don't know, maybe 14, 15 girls that worked in there. It was mainly all female barbers that were in this particular shop. And in about an hour and a half, walked out with about $200. So, I mean, it's a great business. Sharpening has been a love of mine. It's what I've done longer, really, than anything else as far as work is concerned. I have trained with a lot of people. Because here's the thing with this business. There's always something new to learn, or there's always something to be reminded about in the business. So, and new techniques, new things that people come up with. We all have our own way of doing things, don't we? I mean, we really do. That are kind of our basic, this is how I do it, this works for me. And I'm very much that kind of sharpener. I really don't deviate too much from the normal sharpening that I do every day, but I do like to experiment, and I do like to play around with things. So that's a lot of what I do. So I do still do training for sharpeners. I still sell some equipment. I rep a couple lines of shears, and I do the newsletter as well. So if anybody has ever read On the Edge, I appreciate it. Thank you. There's a number of copies that are up there on my table. So go ahead and grab those. They're here. They're available for you. There's no charge for them. Just grab them. Read them if you're interested in it. If you're not getting the newsletter now, let me know, although I am considering probably fairly soon dropping the print edition of it and only going to email version of the newsletter. The reason for that is the majority of my readership is actually switched over to email at this point. So, and I print it in-house on a printer that I have at home. The actual paper version, and once that goes to put, that's going to be it. I'm not going to buy another one. I just don't have enough people to buy the paper version anymore. It's almost all email versions at this point. So that's where I'm at right now. That's kind of my story, and we'll do a little bit here on set. Just kind of, you know, knock our way through. We'll take a crack at it. Let's put it that way, right?
Yes, we like
That's right, crack. Well, hopefully that doesn't happen too much while we're doing this. But we're going to really bend some shears up and bend them back in. So I'm going to show you the real benefit of actually using the Wolf set adjusting tool. Okay, and I actually, on this is the majority of what I do as far as setting is concerned. I really don't do a lot of hammering. The reason I don't do a lot of hammering, again, is are we creatures of habit? Yes. This is what I'm used to doing. This is what I've done the most. But I have done plenty of hammering, and we'll go through that and show the benefits of that as well. Okay? So, let's start off with just, you know, bending the stew out of a pair of scissors. We'll pass that around, and then we'll go ahead and see if we can bend them back in after I do some pretty horrible damage to them. So this is an anvil shear, one of their low-end shears. All right, when you look at that, there's a couple things I want you to do with that shear. But on the shear, as this comes around, when you look at this, I want you to close it like this. I want you to hold it like this. And you can look up at this screen, and the problem is in here, there's really not very good lighting. So I'll show you how you can actually look at these things. When we look at it and look between the blades, look at the shear with it held up like this. A lot of people, when I see people check set, they check it like this. Which way do your eyes run across your head? Do they go up and down or across? They go across. Hold the shear like this. You can actually see it easier that way. Also, when you hold the scissor, even though it is, we can tell there's definitely at least one blade that's bent on that. Is that correct? Yes.
No doubt.
I want you to take that shear, look at it, and then flip it, and look at it again, and then flip it, and you'll actually see how it's easier to tell which one of the blades. I mean, this is very distinct, but you can tell easier which one of the blades has the bend in it. How many times have you seen a shear where you know that there's actually a bend in one of the blades, but it's really hard to tell which one is bent and which one isn't? If you hold it and then flip it and then flip it, a lot of times it makes it easier because when you flip it, it kind of changes what you see when you go from blade to blade. So we'll look at hammering. Now, hammering is an interesting process, because a lot of people are really starting to promote it. They really say that this is the only way to put set back into a shear. And I would probably tend to disagree. So you can put set into a shear all kinds of ways. I prefer this. But all this is a heel dolly. Now, who knows what a heel dolly is? What's that for?
Body work.
Body work, right? So it's for banging dents out and things like that in cars. I use this hammer that I picked up. It's a Craftsman hammer that I picked up at Shears. Remember Shears? So I've had this for a while. It's a great hammer. Again, there's other hammers that have come out that, in my opinion, are probably better than this one. But I own this one. So this is the one that I use. Right? Can you see how that's been beat up just a little bit on the end? Okay. So, yeah, it's a tack hammer. I also like it too because if I am hammering in the salon, and that doesn't happen very often, because let me ask you a question. When you're working on a $400 scissor, and you know all the stylists are standing around, do they like to see you grab one of these and start doing this? I'm sure. No. But listen to this. Listen, ready? Hear the ring? I like to have that ring because at least if I'm going to do it, I want it to get everybody's attention so that I can show them what you're doing. But here's the thing with hammering when you're doing anything on a shear. Do you hear that? Okay. Where am I hitting on the shear?
Directly on the spine.
Directly on the spine. Okay. So Steve, why directly on the spine? That's right. So if I whack the edge, I'm not going to do that. What would happen? It wouldn't be good, right? So right over the spine. Right. What's that? That's right. It's the strongest part of the blade because it's the thickest part of the blade. Now, does it tend to get a little bit weak out towards the tip? Why? Because it's tapered. So if you're going to break the shear, where are you going to break it? At the tip. So as you get to the tip, what should you do? Lighten up a little bit, right? I probably shouldn't be looking up while I'm doing that. Okay, so here's the other thing too that I want you to listen to, and this is important when you're doing any hammering work. There's a sweet spot. You ready? Right on. Okay. So why am I hammering over a curved piece?
Because you're trying to get the bend out of it.
That's right. I'm actually, well, in this particular case, I'm trying to put a little more bend into it. So you want to be able to bend over the top. Now you can here to one side a little bit. See what I'm doing? But when you're doing work, actually you're going to draw the blade right across. You hear how I never stop hitting my sweet spot? Okay, and that's going to help to move the shear over. Now here's what I like about hammering versus
Can you
bending.
hit it one time that's not the good spot so we can hear the difference?
Okay.
Now, here's the
down, right? So what we'll do is we'll see if we can bring this back with the hammering. But first, let's go ahead and run it on a water stone. Let's see what I just did and see what the result's going to be. So let me get my stone. It's a 5,000 grit Shapton, and it's also not flat. I did not flatten it after my class, so don't judge me. I'm like all the rest of you. There's one thing that I could get sharpeners to do would be flatten their stones more.
How often do you recommend flattening stones?
At least every 5 or 6 shears, I flatten every 2 scissors. And people are usually like, oh my goodness gracious, you do it every 2 shears? And I'm like, absolutely. Absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this around. Please ignore the beat up tip, the beat up edge on this. This was just one that got pulled out of a, a little old storage box that I've got. But you'll see when this goes around that we definitely have an issue with the tip as far as the hone line was concerned. You take a look at the tip and you'll see where the tip has been kind of white. But you can also see that we ended up with the overbend of the tip when I hammered over to the right, right? So what that did was it forced the tip up over that curved area. Now what I like about hammering versus bending is the hammering is more designed to shock the memory back into the shear. So let me ask you a question. With metal, when you bend metal, does it fatigue?
Yes.
Okay. When you open and close a shear that has set in it, is there a force to that set? Yes. So as you open and close it, on a very micro level or a very small degree, those shears are flexing as you open and close them. One of the great things about metal is it has memory. So hammering will actually help to bring memory back to the shear. You can actually, as you strike it, it'll tend to want to go back to its place. But the problem is that if you bend it, like we do with these types of tools, you're also fracturing it, right? So there are times when you need to bend it because it's been bent out of shape. Somebody's dropped a shear, they step on it. Somebody dropped it out in the parking lot and they ran over it with their car. I mean, somebody tried to pry a nail out of the floor. It's amazing, isn't it, what people try and do with their shears. Yeah, I mean, really, it's fascinating what people will do with their shears and not even think about it. It's a $350, $400 pair of shears, and they've done something silly like that. So, hammering the set back into the scissor, think of it more as actually helping to massage the memory back into the shear, to bring it back to where it was factory set. Okay? So I find that helpful. That's what I like with that. Now we can take set ins, but I only really use hammering to put a little bit of set back in. If I need to take set out, or if I need to put a large amount of set in, I typically will go back to doing the bending on the tool here. Now, just to show you while I'm up here, and I'm waiting for that other shear to come around, the blue here. So once that hits the end of the line there, if you bring that back up, I'd appreciate that very much. And I'll go ahead and get started on that. I'm going to wipe this down real quick. And I use an Easy Lap 1200-600 diamond plate. Okay? Now, what I do is about once a week, I take this and I have a flat granite plate that I got from, what's that woodworking shop? Woodcraft. It's tooled almost perfectly flat, and I use 400 grit wet dry sandpaper, and I use that once a week just to flatten this stone out to make sure that it is completely flat. Because with this is what I do when I'm actually dressing the stone on the fly, okay? Because we're on the fly most of the time, right? I mean, we're always out, we're running around. So what I'll do is I'll spray this down. I'll spray this side, and I'll just work it back and forth on the stone. So what I do, though, is I always put this at a degree so I'm getting as much of the side of the stone as I can, and work back and forth to flatten the stone. And then I switch and do the same thing on the other side. And that, because I'm working on the parallel sides, will help to keep this flatter instead of doing it like this. And you could do it like this too, but you don't get as much contact with the stone. So I tend to just work it like this, and then occasionally what I'll do as well is I'll chamfer the outside edges. Okay, because have you noticed that if you don't, what happens to your stone? It'll chip, right? Thank you. So would you say this is damaged?
A little bit.
All right. So, a couple of things with this that we're going to go back to and do some sharpening on. Well, not sharpening. Instead. How do you actually see the set in the shear? Now you tried to look at it under this light, right? Was it easy to do? Yeah, okay. All right, granted, that was easy. At least we have a screen up here with some lighting on it as well. You get this light up here, so you can kind of see it. Here's a trick if you're out in the field. And I don't know what kind of light you're using, but if you have anything like this, and I know that Bonnie, you used to use the lights that would flip up, right?
Yeah, we were
So-
having some defective ones. But
Some
we've got
defective ones?
We
Okay.
got some new ones over there you might want to take a look at. Not
Okay.
quite as bright as that.
And I'll do that. And then you also have the light on top of your machine.
Yeah,
Okay, so the
yeah.
little light, right?
Yeah, we
And
got a
most,
little light and we got a little upgrade light.
do you? Okay. Most of the machines have some form of lighting on them, right? Either a little light or something like that. When I want to be able to see what I'm doing on my shear, really the easiest way I've found, and you're going to have these anyway with you, right? Are you going to have tissues with you? Yeah. Okay. If you want a nice little light box that's relatively inexpensive, there's your light box. Makes it much easier to see your set. So you can just take the shear, put it right in front of the tissue, and that makes it easier to actually see.
And turn it this
So-
way to see the.
It's going to be too bright, so I don't
Right,
think
yeah,
you're going
it
to
is
pick up
just
that
too
shear.
bright.
Yep.
But man, they can see it.
But you can certainly see how that helps with being able to see what the set of the shear is. Now, there's another tool that's out recently that I really like. That's
And
helpful.
we've got some back there. They're $70 and then the bar is 20, so basically $90.
Okay, so this is my bar. My bar. So don't steal my bar. And this is from Dennis Brooks, and it's the Hanuberry light box. And this thing is dynamite because what this will do is you can actually, oops, you know what, that shear is still passing around, isn't it? Have we finished up with that other shear? Doesn't pick it up. But what I can do here is I lay this on the tool and actually see the amount of set that's on that shear. Can you see that? Yep. So here's the thing. There's a couple reasons that I really like this. Number one, it actually works. Okay? Now, there's a lot of people that have been building light boxes for a long time. If you go to the factories actually use light boxes like this, only they're much bigger. So everybody has always built their light boxes big, right? What did Dennis do? He condensed it down to mobile size. So it fits comfortably in a van, or it can be brought into a salon. I like this even better for in-salon sharpening. You know why?
You can show this hot fire.
That's right. Watch this. I pull this out, turn the light on, and while I'm doing the sharpening, especially if I'm out in the salon where the stylist can see me, I'm checking the set on the shear. What do you think this generates? Questions? What are you doing? Right. And trust is another thing too. But what are you doing? Well, I'm checking the set on your shear.
Educating with it.
Right. Well, I've never seen anything like that before. I go, really? Your other sharpeners that you use don't have something like this? So that's right there. Oh my goodness, he has a tool, right? He has a tool. They can actually use.
Instilling confidence.
That's right. Instilling confidence. So I'm going to leave this on. We'll pass this around with a, it's got to be a, don't judge my shears, please. Remember they're in the box. When you do this, as you pass this along, you just want to put this down, put your finger over the top hole, and then just look at the gap of light. It should touch behind the screw hole and up at the tip. Okay? Also, don't drop the scissor. Don't drop the scissor, don't drop it on your wrist, don't drop it on your leg, don't drop it on your foot. If you do, my name is Gene McGowan. All right, so let's take this shear that was bent. Get that light out of your face.
Oh, yeah.
Let's take this shear that was bent all to pieces and see if we can't bend this back in.
He doesn't know.
All right. So did everybody see which blade was bent? Yes. Okay. Here's the trick with set. When you have something that is bent out of shape as badly as this one is, we're going to go ahead and bend it in, starting behind where the problem is. So let's start by doing a test cut. Okay? So we're going to see if this will cut the material at all. And it does, until it gets to that bend point. It doesn't want to cut near lantern either. See that? So right about where that actual problem starts, obviously it's not cutting, because the blades are not making contact with one another. So what I want to do is I want to start behind where the bend is. Can anybody tell me what happens if you start in front of it? Make an S, right? An S curve. Yeah, and it makes a mess. And it is, you know, I have managed to take S curves out of a scissor, but in order to take the S curve out, you have to bend the top part back all the way out to match where the bend is from this, and then start back behind to bring it back in. Let me ask you a question. Who in here, when they were a kid, or you know, if they're kind of an adult and they just have nothing else to do, has taken a metal clothes hanger and bent it? Yeah, I know. What's a metal clothes hanger? So let me explain what a metal clothes hanger is. It used to be made out of metal, twisted on the top, and about that thin, right? That before we had a thing called plastic.
The marshmallow holder.
That's right, the marshmallow holder. But who in here has ever said, oh, I want to make a marshmallow holder, but you know what? I don't have anything to cut these with, so what do you do with the hanger?
Unwind it.
Unwind it and then do what if you want to actually get to it? Bend it, and bend it, and bend it, and bend it, and what eventually happens? Okay, because you're fatiguing the metal. You're actually breaking the metal. When you're bending shears, you are actually shattering some of the metal. You're breaking it, okay? So when we put the set back into this, we want to do as little as we can and bend that back in. So I don't know how well you all can see this. This is one of the issues with doing the work. But what I'm doing with the shear, I'm putting my first finger around the handle, my thumb here on the screw hole. The other fingers are around. I'm going to take this hand, I'm going to put it over the top, and that's how I'm going to do my bending. Okay? It gives me the most controlled bend that I can do. Now when I start back here, I'm going to have to put more force into the bend, right? As I get out here, what do I need to do? Put less force. Why?
Because the metal.
The
Tapered and there's not as much surface.
That's true, but also the leverage changes.
Yes.
Right? So it doesn't take as much force to bend here as it did here. So I'm going to start behind where the problem is, and I'm going to start to bend that blade in towards the other blade. And we'll see if it snaps. So Steve, get ready, man. There you go. All right. So I'm going to bend, and there's a couple of different ways you can do this. Watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to bend, hands over the top, bend over, okay? Bend over, bend, nice to meet you. Bend over, right? Sorry, so old flesh joke. And then, or you can do a bend and a twist. You ready? Bend and twist. See what I did? Bend and twist. So what is what are you doing when you twist the blade? You're showing the other edge towards the other blade. Now let's say you have a shear that's had a completely wiped out tip, right? You don't want to put set into that. You can come in here and you can actually do a twist. It'll put a little set in, so be careful. Do a twist, and if you can twist it enough, you might be able to twist the edge up and put a new line on. Right over the one where it's been wiped out on the tip. Who in here has ever seen a wiped out tip? Okay? All right, so again, I'm going to start behind the problem, work my way forward, up towards the tip. Now, what's nice about the Wolf set adjusting tool that I like so much is the Wolf tool is set up where you have different gaps. Now, the one that I use the most is typically these two right here, because that's going to fit most of my shears most comfortably. But if I ever need to do a little bit of fine work at the tip, I can go into the thinner slots And if I have a little bit thicker industrial style scissor, I can go to the thicker slots. Wolf also sells a brass set adjusting tool as well that's really good, and I know that Dennis sells one that's aluminum or aluminium, depending upon where you're from. All right.
I know what you're talking about.
There you go.
I have both.
Excellent. All right, so what I want you to do, there's a couple of, I'm going to pass this back around. Now, I want you to understand, the set is not correct in this shear, just yet. It will be. We'll put it all the way back in. But I want to pass it around. So I want you to hold this in front. And then as you close this, I want you to see that right where the area was, everybody remember where it was bent? Right where it's about, right where the bend was, it flattens out just a little bit and kind of skips. Now when I say a positive point of contact, what I mean by that is the blades as they close, because of the set, are only touching in one point. Okay, it's called the vector point, but it's actually what we call the positive point of contact in the industry. Whereas you close the scissor, it's only touching at one little point as the blades close. If you see it goes flat anywhere, there's a set problem. So I want you to see that, so just turn this on, hold the scissor in front of it, and then just go ahead and close the shear. And if you hold it steady enough, which is not easy to do, you'll be able to see where it wants to kind of skip in that spot. All right, so the other thing that we're going to try and do while that's going around is we'll take this shear and we'll try and knock the set back out of the tip using the hammer, okay? Because here's the other thing with using any kind of a bending block. When you have just a little bit of set that's knocked out in the tip, is it really hard sometimes to control the amount of set that you take out of the tip of the shear, right? But number one, it's small. Number two, it's hard to see. Number three, that's right, it's very easy to break because, again, the leverage thing, so it's further out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn the shear over. I'm going to put it on the set adjusting tool, on my heel dolly, and I'm going to hammer the spine. I'm going to hammer it on the back side. Do you see what I'm doing? Now this is when the stylists really enjoy seeing you do work on their shears if you're doing hammering. They don't like this at all. So what I'm going to try and do is force that tip back down. And take some of that set that was knocked into it out of it. Now what's the probability that I could damage the set on this? Pretty high? 62.375%. That's exactly right. All right, so what I did was I did knock some of that additional curve out of that shear. It doesn't look like I damaged the edge. It doesn't look like I damaged the top. And this is a fairly hard hammer, okay?
Different terminology, but I guess.
If you want to, as far as the hammers are concerned, there's two good hammers that are here that are available. One is Dennis's. So Dennis Brooks makes a handmade hammer. And then in the back, Cascine has two hammers as well. He's got a couple of set hammers in the back. So go take a look at both of them. I'll have this station over by Jason's station. I'll have the heel dolly out. If any of you want to, play around with any of these of those tools. And are they allowed to do that? Are they allowed to use one of the tools to see if it's
Play with tools? Oh, no.
Judy?
I don't know.
Okay. Cascine, can we use one of those hammers if we needed to? Cascine?
Cascade.
Can we use one of those hammers if we needed to? Sure. No, you just keep it up there. It's good. If they want to play with it a little bit, I'm going to let them. Okay.
And I probably have some half blades around here they can bend on.
I'll leave this one up, and they can whack on it and they can listen, and so just so you can get some hands on if you want to play with it. Yes.
I want to ask a question.
Sure.
When you set the tension on a pair of shears and it catches midway, don't you also have some indications that there's some set in those pair of scissors?
Okay, so what you're asking is that if once you tension the shears and you're letting it do a drop test and it's catching,
right.
Or okay, well most of the shears they're all going to have some form of set to them, so that's one of the reasons that it stops. So what you're doing is you're tensioning the shear to match the set. Okay. Now, if the shear is set properly, it's going to feel good. It's going to feel smooth all the way to the tip. The issue though is if it's overset, it may stop in the middle, but it's gonna take a lot of force as you get out more towards the tip to close that shear. You should be able to feel that. Now, if you're brand new to the business, you won't feel it as much. It would be like trying to feel a clipper blade, right? Once you've done clipper blades for a fairly long period of time, you can actually take the cutter and move it back and forth with your thumb and get some sense of the poundage of how much pressure, or the kilograms of how much pressure this is actually on that blade, right? So you can do that, yes.
Does it compare with the light test? I mean, is it all?
Yeah, well, it could. Again, it's all going to be feel. So I tend to trust, what have we been taught since we were kids? We don't always believe what we hear, but seeing is believing. So if we see it with the eyes, a lot of times, that does tend to show us more. So I do like to actually look at the set and see physically how it's actually cutting across. But see, I can have a good positive point of contact all the way down the blade, and the set's way too much in the shear, and it cuts terribly and feels horrible. So it is a feel thing as well. So I don't really know if that answers the question. Does that answer the question? Okay. So that's the tough part is, and of course, if you have other, I'll be over at my table, and we can tool through that a little bit more. But the difficulty with dealing with set and scissors is that it's, honestly, when I'm out in the field, I just don't see that much set issue out in the field. I see where they've relaxed, but I don't see like this kind of damage that I'm passing around with the blue handled shear. I just don't see that much. There are times when I see it, but not very often. And honestly, a good sharpening on a pair of scissors is going to solve 95 to 98% of all your problems that are out there. So again, don't panic. What do I mean by relaxed? That means that they've been open and closed so many times that they started to lose some of this memory. So if you hammer it, you can shock some of that memory back in and bring it back to its initial set, or its initial position. Okay? So that's what I would define as relaxed, and thank you for pointing that out, Judy. I appreciate that. So what I do is I hammer this tip back in. Let's throw our water stone back up here and see if that changed anything. This aging thing is for birds. You know, of all the things that's bothered me, not being able to see anymore has been the bird.
Hey, the alternative to aging is you were saying,
Yeah.
it's
The alternative to everybody complains about getting old and how badly it sucks, but the alternative is way more grim.
That could be.
I don't know. Meeting Jesus is a goal.
Well, I can't really see too much of a difference on this one here as far as the cutting on the stone.
I like it.
But if you hold this up, did you take a look at the tip when it was passed around where it was bent over a little bit? Take a look at this and you can see how I got the majority of that bend back up. Okay? So I'll pass that around. Yeah, I mean, we'll use,
There's a flat bar on there.
there's a flat bar in this, so we can use this to pass that around. So why don't we do that with this as well? Go ahead and use this as well, because what this is going to do is it will let us take the shear, put it up. Oh, you know what? When I took the set out, now what I did was I actually bent it up too much. So this right here is actually duck-billed. So go ahead and pass that around, and we'll have to put set back into it.
We're looking for that.
So here's the thing with hammering. You also have less control. So just that little bit of hammering that I did, it duck-billed that shear. So when you see that go around, you'll actually see the little bit of a duck-bill pooched up. So by a duck-bill, what I mean is instead of the tips touching, they're pooched up like this. Okay? So you'll see that when that comes around. All right. At this point, any questions?
What about the colored shears?
The color-coded shears? Yeah, that's an issue. A lot of times I'll bend those on the bending block because it's plastic, and I won't have as much of a chance of marring the color. I would not hammer the colored shears unless I talk to the customer first. I remember one time I walked into a salon and I introduced myself, And they said, oh boy, we're so glad that you're here. And the stylist turns around and she drops, she was blow drying somebody's hair, and as she pulls around, the cord pulled the hair dryer right out of her hand. It slams onto the tile floor, bursts into flames. And I'm like, so I'm starting to back up, you know. I'm thinking maybe I should just leave and actually instead of actually staying here. So there's all kinds of weird stuff that happens. So on something like that, where the question was, I did the bending on the block, but then when I gave the shear back to the person, even though it was cutting okay for me, it seems like some of the memory it didn't take. It kind of went back. So sometimes it can flex back. Really, the best thing to do would probably go back and do another bend on it again.
So just keep
And
bending it.
keep working on it. The trick though with set is it's very easy to end up oversetting it. So, and here's the other thing too that I found with set. Oh, you know what? I sharpened this, and now it's not cutting. There must be a set problem. You know what I always check before I actually try and do anything with the set? I always check my edge, always. Because there's two things that I found. Either you have three actually. Either you just have a rolled edge, okay? You have a negative angle on the inside because you did something wrong on the water stones, or any of the other tools that you use, or you have a burr left over on here. I always start with my edge and assume I did something wrong with the edge. I don't care how long I'm sharpening, I make mistakes all the time. Before I start looking at set. Because it's also very easy to force a shear to cut by forcing too much set.
I would start with a tension, check your screws.
Yeah.
You might have a washer protruding or something weird like that.
Right, and we'll start from the position of, you know, we've done the free fall test, we've seated the washer and all the other things. Does everybody know what I mean when I say seat the washer? Okay? You have the washer on the head, okay? So you screw the screw in, and you do a free fall test, okay? And it should be stopping about the halfway point-ish or so, maybe 2/3 of the way up. And then you give it to the stylist, and she starts cutting, and all of a sudden the scissors loosen up. And it's because you didn't seat the washer. So what you do is you put it in, do your free fall test, take that. Hear what I'm doing? Listen. Yeah, it's hard to hear. You hear that? That wiggle? As I wiggle it back and forth. I'm seating the washer. See what just happened with this here? See that? Now it closes more. And it's because that washer was not cupped up over the head of that screw. And it's probably because this is sat in a hot car and other things like that. And it's a plastic washer on the inside or a neoprene washer on the inside. And it's moved and it's shifted. You want to make sure that's shifted up so it's cupped over the end of the screw. And then you do another free fall test, and then you do it again until you can wiggle it and it doesn't loosen up. Okay, that's seating the washer. So that's the other thing too that can cause a problem with cutting on shears.
That's the easier thing to fix.
That's true. But I tend to look at my edge before I go to the extreme of set work. So now what I'm going to do, when I got that back, what I have to do is I have to try and hammer the tip in and put set back in. But every time I do that, what am I doing with the tip? Okay, and what is that doing to the metal? This is why I hate set so much. And here's the thing, you really don't do a lot of set in the field.
Don't you do more for dog groomers?
You tend to do more for dog groomers, and let's do the curve shear here in just a second. And I never hammer curve shears, by the way. I always do them.
Very good.
Okay.
So take whatever time you need. This is
But here's the thing. When it comes to doing the set work on the shears, one of the things that I was very fortunate to be able to do was do a lot of work with sets at Wolf. The issue with bending set into scissors in the field is we just don't do it that much as sharpeners. So we don't have the opportunity, thank you, we don't have the opportunity to really get proficient at it. You can take a scissor and you can bend set out, put it back in, and bend set out, put it back in, and bend set out, put it back in. But even when you're doing that, just like this one that we did here, you're going to eventually fatigue that thing out, and it's going to change the way it moves. So just be patient with yourself when it comes to set work. Because set work is tough to learn, and it's hard to do. So I'm going to loosen this screw just a little bit. Okay, and this is a curve shear. So what I'm going to do on the curve shear is unless this is actually has been physically bent, as far as you have your outside curved blade, right, and your inside curved blade, the curve that's on the inside of the shear. I will always do my set work on the inside blade. And the reason that I do that is it's easier, you put less set in, and it's forcing it towards the one that's already bent over anyway. So I'll go in and do my bend work, move it, bend it, bend it, bend it, bend it into the other blade. And now what I've done, remember this one actually had good set on it. Now I'm over set. So I'll pass this around where you can feel it feels good to about here, and then it gets really tight on the close. So you were asking about feel. This is something you can use to actually get the feel for the shear. It also feels very chewy, like not that chewy, okay, because we're doing Star Wars next. But when you can feel where it starts to get really hard to close at that point, it's because it's corrugated. So that's why you're feeling that chewiness. All right, let's take this and let's add that last bit of set into this shear. So I'm going to go in, start behind where the problem is. I'm going to bend inward. It was so fun. I was at the IBSA one time, and I was with Sid Rubenstein. He's another sharpener, and he's out in, I can't remember where Sid is. Sid's a really interesting guy. He's a very good sharpener. And he was saying, I hammer cast scissors. I never break them. I never break them. And I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, because I hammer them over lead. He had a piece of lead, like soft lead, out in his hand. And I said, really? I'd like to see that. So he takes me out to the van. He goes, never break them, ever. So he immediately starts hammering, and what happened? And he looks at me, and I was like, every time something like that's going to happen, that's when it's going to happen. So
You're starting fires and turning some
that's right. So cast shears, you can definitely break cast shears, that's for sure. All right, let's see if I did any better with it.
By the way, if you have to bend the Bonika shoe,
Don't bend the jazzy.
no, it was the big mama you bend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jazzy will bend, but call me first. Since some of them, we cover that under our lifetime warranty. If I say don't bend it, I'll just send you a new one, send that one to me. If it's one that I know that can be bent, I'll indemnify it. So go ahead and try it. If it breaks, I'll replace it. But if you don't call me first, I'm not going to replace it, okay?
Now the nice thing about these shears is you can really put some torque to them. Where with some shears, you don't want to do that. And just make sure you make that known to the customer. Here's the thing with most of our clients, with our customers, they don't really get mad at you if you kind of explain the process to them. And they'll work with you. And if you have to do work like this to a shear, get permission to do it and tell them the dangers. It could break. The edge could be damaged. There could be different things. Do you want to take the risk on that? It's cutting well enough now. It's not cutting as well as I would like it to. And see what they say. If they say, yeah, let's go ahead and try it and see. Say, well, if it breaks, I don't want to be held responsible for that. Now here's the thing, if they're a good customer and I break the shear, what am I probably going to do? I'll probably replace it for them, right? But, you know, again, you kind of have to work your customers and know your customers. Talk to the people. That's the nice thing about being mobile, is you can talk to them while you're right there. So even if you're doing it in the van, if there's something you find with the shear, bring it back. Show the customer. There is the risk that they'll say, oh, you must have done that while you're out in the van. Hey, that's going to happen from time to time, but always go and talk to the customer first and let them know.
Is your dry tissue test as accurate as wetting?
No, probably wetting it would be better. But again, what I'm trying to do right now is just get the set back into that scissor after it's been really tore up. Yes?
Where do you do the set in relation to the other steps of your sharpening? Is this something you do before you put it on your machine, or sometimes if you find it pops up afterward? Okay.
It really depends, you know. It's like anything. You run into here. You should do an analysis of a shear before you do sharpening on it. Larry Brooks, a number of years ago before he passed away, wrote me an article on the 10 steps of analysis that he did on a shear. And Dennis still has his book, I think. Larry Brooks wrote a book.
Still,
I have it at home.
It is.
Is it still published? Yeah. So you can, but I think it's in that as well. But there's 10 steps that he always did with a pair of scissors just to assess the shear before he does the sharpening. So in that case, if I see, like what Bill was asking, if I see that the shear needs set work before I do the work on it, then I'll put the set work in. But most of the time, remember, 95 to 98% of your problems are going to be solved with the proper sharpening. I just do the sharpening and just see how it cuts after the fact. If I have to go back and touch up a damaged edge, I'll do that. Because here's the thing, most of the time, even with the shear with a little bit that's a little off and set, it's still going to cut okay. And it probably came that way from the factory. Not always. I mean, if it's damaged, that's different. But again, I'm a very realistic sharpener. Okay, I'm out there to make money, and I'm out there to make things work for people. And I shoot for perfection and settle for excellence, right? I mean, and so you can't make everything perfect out in the field. You just can't. People will say that you can, but then when I watch them sharpen practically, then they don't. So that's just the way of the world, unfortunately. It's getting pretty close to 12:23. So, questions?
Have you always
One second.
used your anvil standing up? Do you ever run it flat or?
Where I've done, like this?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's curved this way as well.
Uh-huh.
It's actually marred on both. It's marred more on the top because I have a little bit more curvature on the top. So that's actually the side that I prefer to use.
Okay.
But you could use either one. Either side works. And this is a little more stable.
Mhm.
This is a little more exciting.
Can you, if you lay it flat, I'm not ever, that's how I was trained, was using them flat and either I'm doing it wrong or I can't get a ring out of it like you do with the standing up.
Well, when it's ringing, no, it's because of this.
The ring is from the hammer, not the dolly.
That's right.
The dolly's soft, it's not gonna ring.
See the hammer? It's like a tuning fork. So,
I got
it rings. So I liked it.
the same tool here, it looks like it's smaller.
These guys are so boring.
So, Jim.
Opposed to hammering and bending, I know when you hammer, you change the more to metal.
Right, that's
Does the
the argument.
bending do the same thing?
You're generating heat. Well, both are going to generate heat, right? So whenever you're bending something, you're applying force, and force tends to apply heat, right? Now, I would say more than likely that hammering probably, well, potentially would create more force, more heat, right? But, you know, there's so much argument back, and I remember the old days. Jason can attest to this with the old Foley 350, whatever it was, the clipper blade sharpener. Had a flat plate. If you want a hollow ground of blade, you just push harder in the middle, right? So, yeah, I mean, how much is really going on there? A lot of times you're actually, when you're hitting it, you're bending it, there is something going on a molecular level, but the reality is I don't think it's as scientifically fanciful as, I think it's more sci-fi.
I knew when I was in the saw and tool sharpening business, we used to hammer saw blade. I mean,
Yep.
it been and you had to change the molecules to shift in the blade.
Right. So, and that's a good point, because they become relaxed, right, after.
Right.
And that's, so what you're doing is you're
Change the molecule.
bringing the memory back into the metal.
Tension in the blade back.
Sure, and that's a good example, Jim, so thank you. Because when you're pushing back and forth, when you're down here, once you've done the full stroke of the cut, there's not a lot of bend that happens to the blade. When you pull back, not so much, but when you push forward from the tip, what's happening to that blade? It's actually doing this, it's kind of waving as it goes through, so it's getting that initial that's being moved around, and that's creating heat, generating heat, and that does have an effect. Molecular, yes.
True or false, beneficial for me to maybe heat up the blade with a blow dryer before I start bending it or hammering it?
I honestly don't know because I've never tried it. I probably would
It
not.
doesn't work.
Okay, very good.
I was just asking you.
So then false. Okay, here's the thing. Almost everything that somebody's going to ask about some weird thing that they've seen online or whatever, I'm always just, I could just say false as soon as they say true or false, right? So when you're doing stuff online too, when you're reading stuff online and taking advice online, chew up the meat and spit out the bones. Because there is some good information that's on there, and there's some really bad information that's on there. One of the most wonderful things on the face of the planet is the internet, because it allows everybody that has an opinion that wants to express one to express their opinion. One of the worst things about the internet is that it allows everyone that has an opinion that wants to express one to express that opinion.
And unfortunately, the camera was not aimed at you, it was over here on the side, so none of this got videotaped.
Was it? Okay.
But actually,
Even better.
I
The secret is safe with us.
Yeah, I think that's actually better, because I don't want anybody watching a video and not come to a hands-on class to try to do this. And Ralph, can you tell us why?
I have some stitch, or I had some stitches in my hand. After I tried to bend, well, I did bend it a little bit, but I bent it too far, and the shear broke.
Yep.
Of course, after I sharpened it.
And it came back.
And it sliced into my arm and wrist. Cut one of the tendons going to my
Good
thumb.
job, good job.
Good job.
And I'll tell you, it is actually a dangerous thing. One of the gentlemen that I know really well in the sharpening industry, he was actually doing set work on a shear, and it snapped. And when it snapped, it came down, bounced off the table, and actually stuck in his stomach. It went in. He said, "Thank goodness I'm fat." He said it stopped right before it hit the whatever that layer is, before it gets to the inner cavity. So it really, he was not hurt worse. But I mean, that's still, I mean, he got rushed to the hospital and everything else.
Christine Sharpen would be said.
It would be worse if it happened in a salon with a customer.
Oh, yeah,
Because
absolutely.
that customer.
I was worried about Steve.
That customer would sue the hair salon.
Yep.
You know, yeah.
That's true. Yes.
So just worst case scenario, if you get snatched with a shear, if somebody does leave it in, they not pull it out,
Yep.
and they call 911.
Yes, he has medical
Yeah.
training. So.
Well, I pulled it off. Okay, 'cause I-
Did it bleed a lot?
And I pulled it out.
Did it bleed a lot?
No, it actually didn't bleed very much at all. I drove to the emergency room.
Good. That means you didn't cut an artery,
And,
which is good.
no.
Or a tendon, because you can still move your hand.
Actually, when I walked out, the nurses were surprised that there was so little blood.
Right. I had 2.5 hours worth of microsurgery to reattach that nerve.
Oh,
Okay.
jeez.
So-
Okay. All right, I'm calling you. I'll just fly you up to Ontario. You can bend whatever needs to be bent.
Awesome. All right, that's
The
it. We're at
secret
12:30.
is
So.
sell them a new shear.
Yep.
You know?
Thank you all for allowing me to speak.
Thank you.
I do have